Are we at a constitutional crisis if he refuses to comply with a court order? I think there is a constitutional remedy for that. There's only one, and that's impeachment.
Educate, inform, inspire. The Dan Parsons Show, a podcast that lifts up instead of tearing down.
Hey, it's Dan Parsons with the Go Fact Yourself Fact of the Week. Well, in case you hadn't noticed, there's a global trade war going on. So here are the facts.
I kind of feel like Dan Parsons. Dan Parsons lost his job on the conservative talk radio show in Lincoln for using the F word. You know what the F word is? Facts.
Well, hey, it is my pleasure to welcome back to the Dan Parsons Show Lincoln Chamber of Commerce President, Mr. Jason Ball. Jason, welcome back to the show.
Dan, good to see you again. Thanks for having me on again.
Absolutely. Well, I heard you say a couple times in recent days talking about how the federally imposed tariffs are impacting our local business community. So I think that's a message that a broader audience should hear. So the microphone is yours, Mr. Ball.
Well, thanks very much, Dan. And look, we've been in the media recently giving some interviews and just trying to share some information with people about how the impact of a national conversation about tariffs is beginning to be felt here at home. And so we've been trying to talk with as many companies as we can. Obviously, our manufacturers in town have been a big part of that conversation here recently. And I can tell you, everyone that I've been able to connect with is sharing, that they have some concerns. There was an article in the Lincoln Journal-Star by Neil Franklin here this past week, and Neil did a great job of kind of sharing what's going on with projects like the Warhorse Casino and how they've seen some cost increase from, I think, predominantly the steel tariffs. And then he's talking with other construction companies and home builders, for example. And so all that's being felt, but the chamber in such a small way, had a story come up recently that, I shared at our chamber luncheon for April. And that was that we have our squishy little Abraham Lincoln stress ball. Yes, you got yours right there.
There he is.
Those are fun giveaways for visitors, or, we put them in welcome bags. And, in particular, the Visit Lincoln program is really known for those. And it's sort of a fun little symbol of our city, right? And our team, decided we wanted to take that little outfit and change it just for something fun. And you know how they have the red and white stripe Husker overalls that people will wear to Husker games. We thought, wouldn't it be cool if we could dress him up like he's in overalls going to a Husker game, is the thought. And it was months ago this came up, and we went, that's great. People love it. So those cost us about $2.30 some odd cents per squishy stress ball Abraham Lincoln. And we got an email from our provider last week letting us know that as much as they hated to share it with us, apparently the supplier that they get that stuff from is who knows where in China. And given the tariff rates that are in existing at the moment, and those have fluctuated, so this could be a null conversation in 48 hours that we could never predict. But if things are the way they are now, it would cost us the tariff on a $2.30 little Abraham Lincoln piece. The tariff alone per piece would add $2.50 some odd cents. I think $2.58. So more than doubling the incurred cost. Now, the American economy is going to be just fine if we can't have our stress ball Abraham Lincoln guys dressed up the way we want them, right? I'm not saying that's the end of the world, but what has me spooked, Dan, is whether it's China or imports from other areas that are still only subject to the 10% import. That is happening in small and large business, thousands and thousands and thousands of times, impacting hundreds of thousands of products, impacting billions of dollars worth of the American economy. And I don't think the first shoe has really dropped yet, where some of the logistics system has caught up cost-wise. But people will have to pay this tariff if they want to get their product out of, wherever it's received at a port, is my understanding. And so, a week from now, 2 weeks from now, when that first shipment makes it over and off the boat and is sitting in port, that will be some difficult decision making. I know other small businesses have been public about they've had to leave product that is completed in a warehouse in China until they're able to figure out what they're going to do. So it's just another example of this tariff policy. While I understand the goals for it are laudable, we want to see manufacturing increase and become more prevalent in America too. We want to see America make products that are essential for national security and safety, things like semiconductor chips and things that are essential for national defense, for example. Like, those are laudable goals to have, but doing it with a tariff. And this is not just me, but the U.S. Chamber, doing it with a tariff we assess as a unseen tax on American consumers. And it's also another hurdle now that our businesses have to overcome. And so I hope we're able to find a better way forward. I hope that maybe there will be some national agreements that come out of this that, help address the issue and insulate Lincoln businesses and Nebraska businesses from some of these negative impacts, but they are out there right now, and we are concerned that they're having an impact on this economy.
Well, I appreciate that, Jason. I appreciate you popping on here. I think you're getting ready to maybe go enjoy yourself, take some time off from the office, but I appreciate you popping on here and talking about, just real quick to finish up, Jason. I think the other thing, as a business leader, you understand in representing your members at the Lincoln Chamber, that the worst thing for business is uncertainty. And that's
absolutely,
and we're seeing it reflected in the stock market, in the world markets. And so anyway, it's an important issue, and I'm glad that you're speaking out on it.
Well, look, it's not something we set out to do at the beginning of the year. But it is a national dialogue that's preventing, I think, Lincoln businesses from making decisions that they would normally make. And so we're not trying to cause people to panic. We're not trying to raise people's fears. That's not helpful either. But at the same time, I think we do need to have an authentic understanding of what impacts from policy decisions are and can be. And we're going to continue to, fulfill that role of being a frank arbiter about how we see things impacting Lincoln businesses.
Good. Jason, thanks for popping on. Appreciate your leadership, my friend.
Thanks, Dan. Have a great day.
Okay, I'm really excited for today's show. We welcome back Richard Moberly, Dean of the University of Nebraska College of Law. And let's just put it this way. We're all about to go to school on the legal issues surrounding the U.S. government sending migrants to foreign countries, due process, and what really is a constitutional crisis. Buckle up, kids. It's going to get rocky. But before we get to Richard, don't forget, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube page. Okay, here's Professor Moberly. Enjoy. Well, it is my pleasure to welcome back to the Dan Parsons Show, Mr. Richard Moberly, Dean of your University of Nebraska School of Law. Richard, thanks for making time.
Man, it's great seeing you again. I love the new digs. This is great. Not so new anymore.
That's right. Yes. We've been doing, in fact, I look back and you were on way back last year in October, right before the election.
That's right.
But anyway, I appreciate your time. I appreciate your leadership at the university. And well, I have, since you were on the show last, Richard, my producers have produced some quick questions to get to know my guests a little bit better.
Okay.
So if you're game, I've got 4 questions for you, and then you get to fire one back at me. It can be one of the same or something completely different. So,
okay.
All right. If you're ready. Question number 1, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Gainesville, Florida.
Okay.
Home of the national champion University of Florida Gator basketball team.
Go Gators. That's right. Yeah. question number 2. When you were growing up as a kid, what was your dream job?
And it's such a good question. I often joke that every job I've ever had, at some point I said, I'm never going to do that job. So I had a lot of jobs, right? And so I'm never going to be a lawyer, never going to be a professor, and sure will never be dean. So, but back when I was a kid, I think if you put it to me, it probably would have been somewhere between an NBA basketball player and a fireperson, firefighter.
Nice. Well, you've got some height. And
yeah, sure. It stops there.
Oh, that's cool. Okay. Question number 3. And I've gotten really interesting answers from people, especially politicians and people of your stature who have met a lot of famous people. Hmm. But from your perspective, the most famous person you've ever met?
We had Justice Clarence Thomas come give our graduation speech many years ago, and I was able to spend some time with him. And, for someone in the law, be able to spend time. I've met several of the Supreme Court justices, but never spent as much time with them as I have with Justice Thomas. And, he's probably the nicest famous person I've ever met. He was terrific with our students, and just enjoyed my time with him.
Well, that's cool. Well, and yeah, he's really taken to the University of Nebraska. He attends football games, and that's really cool. Really cool. Okay, last question for you with the fun ones. Then we'll get into the meat of this interview. What was the very first concert you attended?
So embarrassing. So I saw Helen Reddy when I was a kid. So the I Am Woman, Hear Me Roar thing. So not the best concert probably, but that was the first one I went to that I have clarity on remembering.
That's cool. Hey,
I'm probably the only one. I guarantee I would be the only one who stakes a claim to Helen Reddy on your show when you ask the question.
It is the first. So
right. All your younger viewers are frantically Googling who is Helen Reddy right now. So
that's a great answer. Okay, your one question back to me.
Here's my question.
Okay.
You read a lot. What's the thing you read the most? What source do you read the most?
So I have, and our viewers and listeners know this, our audience knows this, that since I was 10 years old, I've read the newspaper every stinking day. And, but it's more than that. I really am enjoying Atlantic magazine recently. Okay. And I consume that from cover to cover every month, and then their writings. I just feel that they're doing a fabulous job. And I got to meet some of the people from the Atlantic when they were in town last year for Flatwater Free Press's festival. And I just think, with the changing dynamics of American media, it's more and more difficult to find trusted journalists in a consistent basis. And so I just think the Atlantic is doing some great investigative journalism, as well as, opinion pieces. And so anyway, I'm kind of geeking out about Atlantic magazine.
Have you added them to your Signal group chat yet?
Ooh, I haven't. I need to do that.
Think about that, or at least be careful.
Yeah, very good. Okay. Thank you for doing that. Our audience knows a little bit more about Richard Moberly. I appreciate that very much. Okay. You and I in the pregame talked about what is really important news that is happening in the country here these past few weeks. And so I wanted to get your perspective, Richard, on the perspective on due process and a couple legal cases involving the federal government sending migrants to foreign countries. And so if you're up for that, and I know you are because we talked about this, but your perspective in the latest news. Let's just start with the latest news. The chief U.S. district judge in Washington, D.C., just on Wednesday, said he would launch proceedings to determine whether the Trump administration officials should face criminal contempt charges for defying his order not to remove Venezuelan migrants from the country based on this Wartime Alien Enemies Act. So help us understand that a little bit more, Richard.
Sure. Well, This goes back to, I think, some promises from President Trump to try and deport immigrants who he perceives to be dangerous. The president's invoking this, as you mentioned, this Alien Enemies Act, but I'll just finish out the title of 1798.
Thank you. Yes.
Which I think has only been invoked about 3 times in U.S. history. And it allows for the executive branch to take actions against citizens of countries with which we are at war, or where there's been some sort of invasion of the United States. And he's using that. And the 3 other times it's been used are, I think, the War of 1812 and World War I and World War II. And some of the most infamous incidences in U.S. history, particularly in World War II with the Japanese internment camps. The idea, though, is that he thinks that because there is an invasion of these gangs from Venezuela, that he and El Salvador, that he is able to take them, put them on a plane, and put them in one of the most notorious prisons in the world in El Salvador, this terrorism containment center, or CCOT. And so when they started rounding up these folks who they accused of being members of this gang, the representative, I think the ACLU actually represented some of them and brought a lawsuit saying, you've got to have some process. They got to be able to appear in front of some decision maker, and you have to demonstrate that they are members of this gang, or they pose danger, or somehow fall within the confines of this act. I think even the 3 other times we've used it before, there's at least some hearing to determine if someone was actually of that ancestry of these countries we were actually at war with. And the judge in that case, this was several weeks ago, enjoined the Trump administration from deporting anymore without him getting to understand more about the use of this power under this act and whether it was being used appropriately, and also ordered the government to turn around the plane. And depending on your point of view, the Trump government either ignored it or didn't get the message. It's actually very hard to untangle because they haven't been very forthcoming with facts. And a group of planes landed in El Salvador, and those people are now in prison in El Salvador.
Yeah. And so this latest from the judge just a couple days ago, threatening contempt. So
So the judge has been trying to dig in for weeks on what actually happened. Was his judgment and his order disobeyed? And one of the kind of most basic precepts for those of us in law school and teaching law, and honestly for lawyers, is you got to obey a judge's order. You may not like it, and if you don't like it, you can appeal it. But in the meantime, you got to obey it. You don't get to just ignore it or disobey it. And so there is a larger issue going on here on the power of the judicial branch over the executive branch. And there's a real separation of powers, going back to Schoolhouse Rock sort of days.
That's right. That's right.
And what kind of deference the judicial branch should show the executive branch in these sort of allegedly national security incidents or decisions, and what type of role the executive branch has to take when being ordered to do something by the judicial branch. And ultimately, that case goes, interestingly, up to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court says, doesn't decide on the merits, but says you, judge in Washington, were not actually the right venue because they were initially detained in Texas, and so sends it down to Texas. This judge says that's fine, but I had an order in place, and I'm going to find out whether and who disobeyed it, who ignored this. So he's been trying to get information from the government, and just recently this week released a long opinion saying he thinks there's probable cause for contempt.
And so then what powers does that judge then have to follow through with contempt charges?
So it's a great question. I mean, there's civil contempt, which the judge could do on their own. The criminal contempt, the judge could send it to the Department of Justice to prosecute, could appoint a special prosecutor to prosecute. With a criminal contempt, even if someone was found in contempt, of course, the president would be able to pardon that person with the president's pardon powers. So, at the end of the day, what does that look like as we get down the road? But it is a pretty big deal. I've thought the whole time that the judge needed to start thinking about contempt, that the more lawyers are appearing in front of this judge and obfuscating or misleading, or in some cases, people would say outright not telling the truth, or at least their clients were not, about complying with this court order. And so I think even the threat of that might have some impact, but ultimately what we'll all find out is if there's teeth behind what a judge can do. And that's really sort of at the crux of a lot of these things, is the judicial system has relied on the executive branch to enforce its orders if people did not do it automatically. And so, we're reaching a point where if the executive branch is not going to comply with court orders, that's very dangerous for our constitutional structure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, moving on, in the cases that the Trump administration finds themselves embroiled in, of course, the most talked about case here in the past couple weeks, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who was mistakenly sent to an El Salvador prison last month by the Trump administration after Mr. Garcia's family sued the government seeking his return. Several Trump administration officials, including the United States Solicitor General, said, yeah, they made a very rare admission. We made a mistake.
And just as a quick circle back to the case we were just talking about, there's actually been a lot of investigative reporting of the hundreds of people who were initially deported in the case we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And many of those people are assumed to be gang members by the government because of clothes they were wearing or tattoos that they had. The evidence on it is allegedly, on many of them, very thin, right? Some of them, I think, are kind of criminals and part of the gang, and some are not. And that's part of the problem when you don't have a due process for someone to come in and make a claim that, even if you could do this to MS-13 or whatever gang, is that even if this was proper, I'm not actually a member of that gang, and there wasn't any process for that. And what the papers are coming out with is a lot of those people weren't, and that's squarely with Mr. Abrego Garcia. And the big difference is the government initially admitted this was just an administrative error.
Well, and here's what's even more maddening. Earlier this week, Stephen Miller, Trump's top domestic policy advisor, abruptly changed course and declared on Fox News that Mr. Garcia had not, in fact, been wrongfully deported. So my head is spinning. What is it? Yeah,
well, I'd like to see that. There are a lot of statements that what I'm finding is I think this should be interesting for people to watch. Watch what officials say to the news.
Yes.
And then watch what they actually say under oath to courts. And those might be very different things. They might not, but I think that's hard to square. It's hard to square that, Mr. Miller's statement, with what the government has already admitted. And of course, as a law dean and a law professor and a lawyer, I'm astonished by, after that admission, I think this is accurate. The lawyer who made that was disciplined by the Department of Justice for not being a zealous enough advocate.
Correct.
Which we do teach our lawyers to be zealous advocates, but we also teach them they have a duty to be honest in front of a court, right? I mean, your duty to be a zealous advocate does not overwhelm your duty of candor to the court. And so, what message does that send to every other lawyer in the Department of Justice? I think is a fair question to ask.
Well, and that's just it. I just keep coming back to this theme, whether it's this issue of due process and these migrants being sent abroad, or if it's this global trade war that we've now embroiled in, putting at risk the cooperation of free trade, and then you add on top of that the president. And again, I'm not necessarily asking you to. I'm coming to a conclusion on here that something you mentioned earlier. The other issue of abandoning 80 years of defending democracy in Europe, and so to me, what all of that tells me, and now these legal issues on top of this, what that tells me is we are putting at risk the trust of the United States of America, not only with our own judicial system and separation of powers, but our global reputation around the world. So anyway, I just keep coming back to that word that you used earlier is there is a matter of trust. And man, there's some challenges there.
Well, you see it play out really in a profound way in this Garcia case on some of the disconnect between, I think, our normal norms about how lawyers would interact with courts. So in that case, the district court judge ordered the government to bring him back because they had admitted it was an administrative error and he should not have been deported in the first place. It goes up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court says, the government shall facilitate, is the word they use, bringing him back with due regard for the deference that we normally give to the executive branch for conducting foreign affairs. Right. So that's the order from the court. So the district goes back down to the district court and says, okay, bring him back, or tell me what your efforts are to bring him back. And met with nothing but stonewalling in court. And then you should watch the press conference with the president of El Salvador and President Trump and the other administrators there saying, we're not going to bring him back. We're just not. And so, there's a lot of debate right now that around the word facilitate.
Yes.
And what that exactly requires. I'm a little astonished by that lawyers are making those arguments in front of the court. It's gone up. Actually, I just before logging on here saw an hour ago, the Fourth Circuit upheld the district court's holding in the case that they had to do more. So the Trump administration had appealed the district court case again, and the Fourth Circuit upheld it and said the district court judge gets to manage this case. So, all of this is to say there's we're seeing more disregard for court orders than I'm certainly comfortable with. Now, I will say several months ago when this started to begin and people started to get anxious, I mentioned to a lot of people, like, until we have a direct disregard of a Supreme Court order, let's not get too worried here. And where we are right now is about as close to that as we can get. I mean, we're arguing over what it means to facilitate. So I think that is an actual cause of concern, Dan, that as we think about this battle. Now, can I just pause for a second and step back 10,000 feet?
Yes.
So I think there's actually reasonable minds can disagree how much a district court should be able to impose on an executive branch official in their conduct of foreign affairs. 100% get that. Supreme Court said that. And where that line gets drawn, I think reasonable minds can disagree.
Sure.
What I don't think is debatable is that if you don't like the way the district court landed on that balance, your obligation is to comply with the district court or appeal it. Right. So that's number one. And that's sort of what's happening. Right. But I want to step even further back and just say, I'd like people to think about the humanity of this particular case, where we take the government at its word that this person should not have been deported. This was an administrative error, right? And I think there is a way where you can debate that high-minded sort of, district court, you don't get to order us to do this, and we're going to fight that. At the same time that you recognize he shouldn't have been deported and we're going to do everything to bring him back. Yeah. Right. Because we made a mistake. Yeah. And owning that mistake. And that humanity, I think, is what's really missing. Like this person is being sacrificed in the form of it, in this debate. That's really kind of a constitutional structural debate. And that I'm just astonished by. I'll be honest.
Yes. And I think most people are, hopefully. What role now does the Supreme Court have in this case? What role might they have moving forward?
Well, I mean, this district judge is going to face some of the same dilemma that the district court judge in the other case that we were talking about is going to have to face. So faced with resistance and incalcitrance by the party, you can start contempt proceedings, and take that as far as you can take it. And if it then would be appealed, then the Supreme Court could kind of say whether those were proper or not, and might help us draw these lines a little bit more clearly. The Supreme Court could order the executive branch to bring him back. All right, not just facilitate, but actually, no, you made a mistake, you will need to bring him back. And, then we'll be at the point where they either do it or they don't. And if they don't, we are in a crisis mode where the structure that we've set up for 200 however many years is really being undermined.
That's the other thing, Richard, we're visiting with Richard Moberly, Dean of the University of Nebraska School of Law. I did want to have you help us parse that phrase that has been thrown around a lot in the past couple months, unfortunately, constitutional crisis. And I think any of us, as you said, our middle school government class, the separation of powers. So some people are suggesting we're there. So what does that look like moving forward? Are there other examples in United States history where there was a true constitutional crisis between the court and the executive branch?
So first, to set the stage for this, right, part of what's going on is the Trump administration is very forcefully putting forth this theory called the unitary executive, where all of the powers invested in Article 2 of the Constitution are in the single executive, and everyone in that branch is beholden to their orders and commands, including the Department of Justice. And one of the reasons that's so, and the Federal Bureau of Investigations. And one of the reasons that's so surprising to anyone who's been around in the last 50 years is that was kind of broken apart in the Nixon post-Watergate dilemma, right, where the FBI was used to investigate Americans, and the Department of Justice was being used to, on behalf of the president to pursue criminal and other sanctions. And the consensus post all of that was the Department of Justice, to truly be our law enforcement entity, needed to have some measure of separation from the executive branch, which is why when the executive branch itself is accused of wrongdoing, oftentimes the Department of Justice will have an independent counsel and that sort of thing. So it is really that sort of 50-year plus consensus that the Trump administration is pushing back on. Of course, the Department of Justice and the FBI and everything that don't appear in Article 2 either, right? There's a lot of stuff. But it's really this is, I think, Andrew Jackson's famous line of the Supreme Court's order, let them enforce it, right? When we're talking about moving Native Americans. So there was that crisis. There's the crisis with subpoena in the New York Times case and the Nixon case, U.S. v. Nixon, subpoenaing the records and the recordings from the Nixon tapes. And he eventually backed down to that. But it's interesting to note he backed down when Republicans came to him and said that they were going to vote for impeachment if he didn't resign.
Correct.
And I think if you do the reading on this, there are a lot of people in that White House who were really frustrated that he backed down. And some of those same people have been the through line through this entire process for the last 50 years of creating this idea of this unitary executive. So, I think, are we at a constitutional crisis if he refuses to comply with a court order? I think there is a constitutional remedy for that. There's only one, and that's impeachment, right? And whether that's viable or not, and whether the Congress has the political will to do that or not, that's another question. But it becomes at that point a political question as opposed to a legal question, quote unquote. Does that make sense? It
is. Impeachment and removal from office, because obviously Mr. Trump was impeached twice before and not removed from office.
Right.
That's the ultimate. And that's just it. I grew up, our audience knows that I was a geek back in the 70s. I referenced it earlier of, that's how I became interested in public policy and politics, was because of that, and was because of what Nixon did. And the threat of impeachment. And at the end of the day, as you noted, he did the honorable thing and resigned. Boy, how things have changed.
Well, I mean, he is always President Trump, I will say, has always said he would obey an order of the Supreme Court.
That's right. That's right.
So, we just may get to that point, and that may clarify things, and the temperature can cool down a little bit. I will say there's 179 lawyers in Congress. And to the extent they grew up in a system and in a law school that talked about the rule of law and talked about candor before a tribunal and complying with court orders as kind of just baseline assumptions of our judicial system and our constitutional order and structure. I'd be curious to know, what they are thinking about all of this.
Well, and I hope the news media and the voters will ask those questions and hold those people to account, because we could go on and on about how the administration is treating journalists and banning them from the White House and all of those things too.
And Dan, if I may say one more thing, you started
Please.
this conversation talking about due process, and it's sort of kind of can be a vague sort of term that people who are not imbued in this system might not appreciate, particularly when people argue it ought to be applied to some of the most violent, hateful people in our society. And there's no doubt in my mind that some of those people on that plane who got deported, we are probably safer and better off as a society if those gang members are not in our country. The issue is that our society is also built on the structure that you don't get to have that awesome power of the state with that complete control over somebody's life without having a neutral decision maker without being able to stand in front of a neutral decision maker and be able to state your case. That's due process at its basic form. And when we don't allow it for the people we consider the kind of worst of the worst, to maybe use a Trumpian type phrase, right? It very quickly becomes, well, who gets that process then? And it becomes a very dangerous game when you're deciding who gets the benefit of that process and who doesn't, right? And that's what I worry about, right? Is that, you may not be able to relate, or one may not be able to relate to Mr. Abrego Garcia or to some of these gang members, but mistakes are made, right, in these processes. And so being able to, it's kind of one of the cornerstones of our system that keeps all of us safe and free, because we know we will be able to have that stand up in front of somebody and talk about why it shouldn't happen to us. And I'm nervous about the statements being made that, that these are sort of test cases, and that they want 6 more or however many more prisons in El Salvador, and they want some homegrown people to go there. And I start to wonder what that is really about.
Yeah. Who's next?
Stepping back from it again, I don't want to be an alarmist, but I do think this due process has to be applied for everyone. We don't get to pick and choose, right? And I think that's sometimes gets really hard to understand when a Timothy McVeigh or the 9/11 bombers,
right,
or some of these people come forward.
Yeah,
by providing that process for them, it protects all of us.
Well, and that's what sets apart this greatest country on the face of the earth and our democracy. That's what sets us apart from other countries who don't have that system. And like you said, it's making a lot of people nervous that we are breaking down those traditions and breaking down the system. And yeah, it's a worrisome time.
And I guess I would also think of if there are people out there, and I know there are, who are fully behind how this is happening. I would just ask them to think if somebody else was in charge, who had that power, right? Once we give this power up, it is not easy to bring back. And I think that is how we all need to think about it. Like, are we willing to give this up to the person that we don't agree with, and how they're behaving? And for me, I like those checks, regardless of who's in charge.
Yeah. Well, thanks for taking us to school, Professor.
Well, I appreciate you asking me back on the show. It's great to see you. and love what you're doing here. Thanks so
Well,
much.
and before we get away, I want to ask you what's going on at the school. By the way, I ran into a well-known attorney here in town just last night and told him that I was having you on the show today. And he had mentioned to me this project that you've been working on with other Big Ten schools. So do you want to brag about yourself a little bit?
Yeah, well, when, there are many of us who are kind of thinking about the rule of law, because regardless of what you think about what's happening, there's no doubt that the way we thought about the rule of law 6 months ago is being pressed and pushed and recalibrated and changed. I mean, there are lots of unique things happening right now, and some like it and some are upset by it. But I thought with my Big Ten colleagues that we could do what we do best, which is try and educate. So we put together 10 panels over the course of 10 weeks. It's every Wednesday at 4:00. You can go to our website, each on a different topic, where we bring in experts from across the country, almost all Big Ten professors, but not all, and people with different perspectives and different views. We've all been very clear on that we needed some debate and some understanding from the various sides on topics like diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, and the First Amendment and academic freedom. Last night was international law, and kind of pushing the boundaries of international law and understanding where that came from and what the arguments are. Executive power versus judicial power. We did several weeks ago.
Wow.
I mean, these are every week that happens. It seems like we were very prescient, but it just seems that these things are just in the news right now. And so each law school has kind of taken a lead on each panel, and the University of Nebraska, I'm very proud to say, kind of led the overall charge in organizing it, and we host all of them. And so I'm really proud that we are getting ideas out there and debated. I think that's what universities do when we're at our best. So these are unique times, and I think people need to think about it and hear different perspectives. So that's number one. The other thing I'll just say very quickly, you didn't ask this, but I have a chance to plug it.
Hey, you got the microphone, buddy.
We were up 45% in applications this year for next year's class. We have a really competitive, probably will turn out to be the strongest academic class we've ever had. We had more applications than we've had in the last 30 years. So University of Nebraska College of Law is becoming a destination place for students, particularly students interested in public interest and public service, but also we turn out a lot of students who go work for great law firms and companies, and they get a great education, and they end up with the fourth lowest debt in the country. They pass the bar, 90% rate, get jobs, 90% rate. So this is a really special place. I've spent 21 years here, and I hope to spend many more. It's been a great experience being the dean at the University of Nebraska College of Law.
Well,
I haven't been dean for 21 years. I don't want to be misunderstood.
Facts. We like the
Facts. Right. Dean for 9 years. Yeah.
Well, Richard, thanks for your leadership. I mean, and again, this attorney I ran into, I won't mention his name because he didn't give me permission, but he was singing your praises that you were leading that group and had created that project. And so good on you. Yeah.
Well, thanks. There's a lot of support here at the university for that sort of thing. So the team that we put together to run it has been fantastic.
Yeah. Well, again, thanks for your time.
Hey, Dan, great seeing you. This is really interesting stuff. We'll see what happens next.
An important update. Late Thursday night, Maryland U.S. Senator Chris Von Hollen said that just tonight on Thursday, he met in San Salvador with Abrego Garcia. This is the first time anyone has been able to make contact with Mr. Garcia since he was deported to El Salvador by the Trump administration on March 15th. An important update. My thanks to Chase Porter for producing this episode, Penology Tech Solutions for their technical help and equipment, Kim Remington, Parsons Public Relations Director of Operations, and most importantly, thanks to each of you for tuning in. Don't forget to hop on over to the YouTube page and hit the subscribe button. Okay, that's the show. Thanks for tuning in. Now go do good things. I'm Dan Parsons.